So welcome to one of our 2-bedroom apartments at Fitzroy and Cove. As you can see...
It's renting, but not as you know it. At least that's the big promise. Build-to-rent developments like this one are popping up in our big cities, claiming a new way of living for Australia's weary renters.
It's a pretty big vision for build-to-rent that's going to be a real game changer, I think, for renters in Australia.
The concept is big overseas, but relatively new here, where developers have long built apartments to sell individually. A build-to-rent development is just as the name says, apartments purpose-built for the rental market.
Build-to-rent as a product targeted at a wider market, at the mainstream market, is a much newer thing. Really only since about 2017 or so. There are about 5,000 units, 5,000 apartments in buildings that are homes of this kind so far across Australia, and about 11,000 in the pipeline.
Under this model, buildings are required to be held by one owner, usually a managing operator for at least 15 years.
These apartments are not built to be traded. They're built to be occupied for long periods by tenants who are generating a steady, reliable rental income for the proprietor.
If you're a renter, you probably know the fear of being evicted if your landlord wants to sell or move back in. One big difference with build-to-rent developments is having the option of a very long lease.
There's a much higher degree of security in a build-to-rent building than you would normally get in the private rental market.
But are they affordable?
The initial build-to-rent developments that we're starting to see, particularly in cities like Melbourne, they are very much targeted towards moderate to higher income renters, so it's a premium product.
At this development in Melbourne's Fitzroy North, leases are up to 3 years. There's a theatre room, a record lounge, yes, vinyl for those who remember, and even a dog wash.
There's no debating on paper, it is a premium, but the experience that you get living in a build-to-rent building is a far more premium experience.
Long-time renter of 20 years Vanessa Fraser argues these extra services are a plus.
It's still within my budget, so I'm not extending myself beyond what I can afford. But for me, the value for money, I actually feel comfortable about spending that here for what I'm getting. It's just a really comfortable experience. It's like living sort of like a cross between a hotel and an apartment.
For several years now, some state governments have offered generous tax breaks for build-to-rent developers. Following a tussle over its housing legislation, the federal government will now move to introduce tax breaks for investors from overseas, where build-to-rent is more common.
It's an appreciable amount. It's, I think, enough to give the product, the sector, a little bit of a fillip.
The tax break will be tied to certain conditions, including ensuring there's at least 10% affordable homes, a minimum lease of 5 years, and no-fault evictions. The government says the policy will lead to 80,000 new homes.
It's a very small contribution to the much bigger challenge of providing sufficient affordable rental housing to middle to lower income Australians. And yes, let's welcome it on that basis, but without pretending that it solves the problem.
Yeah, I mean, the politicians are telling us that this is an affordability solution.
It's, yeah, that I think is overstating the case by quite a lot.
Back in Melbourne, a few suburbs away in Kensington, a new build-to-rent development is taking shape, with affordability a focus.
So we're about 40% studios and one-bedroom apartments.
Due to be completed late next year, there'll be more than 360 homes. 20% of those will be social housing, another 20% will be affordable homes in line with Victorian government requirements.
Real opportunity that we're focused on is how can you deliver income appropriate housing for, sort of middle Australia, if you like, coupled with, and operating at the intersection of delivering, really long-term stable returns for our investors at scale.
Assemble has teamed up with major super fund Hester, which has committed $100 million to this project.
We're confident that these projects are delivering sort of stable long-term returns that are sufficient for them to sort of mobilise capital at scale, into Australian housing.
Housing expert Hal Pawson says it's a small step towards solving a much bigger problem.
There will be over the long term, moderating effect on both prices and rents. So in some small way, if the build-to-rent sector starts to expand in the way that the Property Council and others are hoping that it will hopefully provide a small contribution to that bigger objective of 1.2 million new homes in the next 5 years, which is the government's declared target.